The rain hammered down on the rough-hewn door of the cabin like bullets ricocheting off stone, and Ryder Malone thought he might ignore the desperate knocking until a woman's voice called out through the storm, cracking with exhaustion and fear. He set down the worn leather bridle he had been mending and crossed the small room in 3 strides, pulling open the door to reveal a soaked figure in black, her face pale as death in the lantern light that spilled from behind him. "Please," she gasped, swaying on her feet. "I need shelter. Just for the night. I can pay." Ryder caught her elbow as she stumbled forward, rain pouring off the brim of her bonnet in sheets. "Get inside before you collapse," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. He guided her over the threshold and kicked the door shut against the howling wind that had been tearing across the Wyoming plains for the past 2 days. The woman stood dripping on his floor, her black dress clinging to her frame, her lips tinged blue from the cold. She clutched a small carpet bag to her chest like it contained everything she owned in this world. Ryder suspected it probably did. "Sit by the stove," he ordered, dragging his single chair closer to the cast iron heat source that kept his modest cabin livable through the harsh winters near Mineral Point, Wyoming. The small town sat nestled in the foothills, and though it was only September of 1878, the nights already carried the bite of the coming cold season. She sank into the chair without argument, which told him more about her condition than words could. Her hands trembled as she tried to unfasten the ties of her bonnet, but her fingers would not cooperate. "Here," Ryder said, kneeling beside her. He brushed her fumbling hands away gently and untied the wet ribbons himself, lifting the sodden bonnet from her head. Dark auburn hair, coming loose from its pins, fell around a face that might have been beautiful if it were not drawn tight with exhaustion and something deeper. Grief, he recognized. He had seen that look before in the mirror after his own losses. "Thank you," she whispered. Her eyes, when they met his, were an unusual shade of gray, like storm clouds over the mountains. "I am Prudence Palmer. I apologize for disturbing you so late." "Ryder Malone," he replied, standing and moving to the small trunk where he kept his spare clothes. "And it is not that late, just dark from the storm. You are lucky you found this place. There is nothing else for 5 miles in any direction." He pulled out a rough wool blanket and brought it to her. "You need to get out of that wet dress or you will catch your death. I will turn my back and tend to the coffee." Prudence looked at the blanket, then at him, uncertainty flickering across her features. But the cold must have won out over modesty because she gave a small nod. Ryder turned away and busied himself with the coffee pot, listening to the rustle of wet fabric behind him. "You can look now," she said after a minute. He turned to find her wrapped in his blanket, her black dress draped over the back of the chair, steaming slightly in the heat from the stove. She looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable, and he felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness that caught him off guard. "You said you were traveling," he asked, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. He handed her one and she wrapped both hands around it gratefully. "Yes. I was making my way from Cheyenne to Mineral Point. My husband died 3 months ago." Her voice caught slightly on the word husband. "I sold what little we had and was coming here to start fresh. I heard there was work at the hotel, perhaps cooking or cleaning. You were traveling alone." Ryder could not keep the disapproval from his voice. A woman alone on these roads was asking for trouble, especially one as fine-looking as Prudence Palmer, even in her grief and exhaustion. "I had no choice," she said, a flash of defiance in those gray eyes, "and no money to hire protection. I thought I could make it before the weather turned, but my horse went lame yesterday afternoon. I have been walking since dawn." Ryder felt something twist in his chest. She had been walking for hours in this storm, alone and grieving. "You should have stayed in Cheyenne." There was nothing for me there, Prudence said softly. My husband had debts. Men came to collect. I left with what I could carry. He understood that well enough. The West was full of people running from something, trying to outpace their past. He had been doing the same thing for the better part of 3 years. You can stay here tonight, he said. The storm should break by morning. I will take you into Mineral Point tomorrow. Relief washed over her face, followed quickly by wariness. I said I could pay. I have a little money. Keep your money, Ryder said, moving to stir the pot of stew he had simmering. It was not much, just rabbit and vegetables, but it was hot and filling. You will need it more than I do. They ate in relative silence, the awkwardness of two strangers sharing close quarters settling over them. But Ryder found himself watching her from the corner of his eye, noting the way she savored each bite as though she had not eaten properly in days, which she probably had not. The way she kept the blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. The purple shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. How long were you married? He asked, surprising himself with the question. He was not usually one for conversation, especially about personal matters. Prudence looked up from her bowl. 2 years. William was a good man, just unlucky. He tried to make a go of a dry goods store in Cheyenne, but the debts from his previous business followed him. When the fever took him, I thought it might be a mercy. He had been so worried, so worn down. And you, are you all right? She gave him a look that suggested the question was absurd, but then her expression softened. I am alive. Some days that is enough. Ryder understood that too. He stood and moved to the narrow bed in the corner. You take the bed tonight, I will make do with the floor. I cannot ask you to do that, Prudence protested. You have already been more than kind. You are not asking. I am offering. Truth be told, I have slept on worse than a wooden floor. At least here I am dry and warm. She opened her mouth as if to argue further, then closed it. Thank you, Mr. Malone, truly. Ryder, he corrected. If we are sharing a cabin, we might as well dispense with formalities. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Then you must call me Prudence. He nodded and began arranging his bedroll on the floor near the stove. Outside, the storm continued to rage, wind howling like a wounded animal, rain drumming an endless rhythm on the roof. But inside the cabin, there was warmth and the quiet companionship of two people who had both known loss. Prudence settled into the bed, still wrapped in the blanket, and within minutes her breathing had evened out into sleep. Ryder lay awake longer, staring at the ceiling beams, wondering what had possessed him to be so hospitable. He had spent 3 years avoiding people, keeping to himself, working his small cattle operation alone. He preferred it that way. People brought complications, and he had had enough of those to last a lifetime. But there was something about the woman sleeping across the room from him, something that had stirred feelings he thought he had buried along with his own wife and infant daughter 4 years ago. Perhaps it was the grief he recognized in her eyes, or the way she held herself together despite obvious exhaustion and fear. Or perhaps it was simply that he had been alone too long, and even his hardened heart could not turn away someone in genuine need. He finally drifted off to the sound of the storm, and when he woke in the gray light of dawn, the rain had stopped. Prudence still slept, one hand tucked beneath her cheek like a child. Ryder moved quietly, building up the fire, starting a fresh pot of coffee, frying up some salt pork and the last of his eggs. The smell must have woken her because she stirred, sitting up slowly and blinking in confusion before remembering where she was. Her hair had dried in loose waves around her shoulders, and in the morning light, Ryder could see that she was younger than he had first thought, perhaps 25 at most. "Good morning," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. "Morning. I made breakfast." "Your dress should be dry enough to wear." She glanced at the black garment hanging on the chair and something sad crossed her face. Yes, thank you. They ate together, the morning light streaming through the single window, turning everything golden. Ryder found himself reluctant to saddle his horse and take her into town as he had promised. The cabin felt different with her in it, more like a home than the lonely outpost it had been for so long. But he pushed the feeling aside. She had a life to build, and he had work to do. "Give me a few minutes to hitch up the wagon," he said when they had finished eating. "It will be more comfortable than riding double on my horse." Prudence nodded and stood, moving behind the hanging blanket he had strung up to give her privacy while she dressed. Ryder went outside to find the morning fresh and clean after the storm, the sky a brilliant blue, the grass heavy with raindrops that caught the light like diamonds. His 2 horses stood in the lean-to, dry and unbothered by the previous night's fury. He hitched Copper, his older gelding, to the small wagon he used for supply runs and led them around to the front of the cabin. Prudence emerged dressed in her black widow's weeds, her hair pinned back severely, the carpet-bag in her hand. She looked different now, buttoned up and proper, and Ryder felt an odd sense of loss for the vulnerable woman from last night. The ride into Mineral Point took just over an hour. The road, such as it was, had turned to mud in places, but Copper was sure-footed and patient. Ryder and Prudence did not talk much, both lost in their own thoughts. As they crested the final hill and the town came into view below them, Ryder felt that strange reluctance again. Mineral Point was not much to look at. Just a main street with a dozen or so buildings, a church at one end, and scattered houses and farms spreading out from the center. But it was home to nearly 200 people, and that made it substantial enough to have the basics. A general store, a hotel, a blacksmith, and 3 saloons, which Ryder always thought was at least one too many for a God-fearing town. He pulled the wagon up in front of the Mineral Point Hotel, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and a sign that had seen better days. Martha Kincaid, the owner, was sweeping the steps when they arrived. She was a formidable woman in her 50s who ran the hotel with an iron fist and a kind heart. "Ryder Malone," she called out. "What brings you into town? And who is this?" "Morning, Martha. This is Prudence Palmer. She was caught in the storm last night and needed shelter. I heard you might be looking for help." Martha's sharp eyes took in Prudence's widow's clothes, the carpet-bag, and the weariness that still clung to her. Her expression softened. "Come inside, both of you. I will make tea." The hotel's small parlor was neat and comfortable, furnished with pieces that had been hauled over mountains and across plains by early settlers. Martha bustled about, putting the kettle on, fetching cups, all the while asking Prudence gentle questions about her situation. "I can cook and clean," Prudence said. "I can sew and do laundry. I am willing to work hard for room and board and a small wage." Martha nodded slowly. "I do need help, that is true enough. My cook quit last week to get married, and I have been doing everything myself. But I need to know you will stay. I cannot afford to train someone only to have them leave after a month." "I will stay," Prudence said firmly. "I have nowhere else to go, and I need to make a life here." "All right, then. You can have the small room at the back on the 1st floor. It is not much, but it is private and warm. Wages will be $20 a month plus room and board. You will help with cooking, cleaning, and laundry. Sundays off except for breakfast duty." Relief flooded Prudence's face. "Thank you, Miss Kincaid. You will not regret this." "It is Mrs., but call me Martha, and I do not think I will regret it. You have an honest face." She turned to Ryder. "Thank you for bringing her to me. Will you stay for lunch?" Ryder shook his head, suddenly eager to leave. "I need to get back. Cattle will not tend themselves." He stood and Prudence stood with him. They walked out onto the porch together, the morning sun warm on their faces. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. You saved my life last night." "You would have made it," Ryder said, though he was not sure that was true. "You are stronger than you think." "Perhaps, but I am still grateful." She looked up at him, those gray eyes searching his face. "Will I see you again?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with more meaning than the simple words implied. Ryder knew he should say something non-committal, should keep his distance. But instead he heard himself say, "I come into town for supplies every couple of weeks. I suppose our paths will cross." A small smile touched her lips, the first real one he had seen. It transformed her face, chasing away some of the grief and exhaustion. "I would like that." He tipped his hat and climbed back onto the wagon, feeling her eyes on him as he drove away. When he looked back at the edge of town, she was still standing on the porch, a small figure in black, and he felt that pull again, that sense that something important had just happened and he was riding away from it. The days passed slowly after that. Ryder threw himself into his work, mending fences, checking his small herd, preparing for the winter that would come all too soon. But his mind kept drifting back to Prudence Palmer, wondering how she was settling in, if Martha was treating her well, if she thought about him at all. He told himself he was being foolish. She was a widow, still grieving her husband. He was a man who had sworn off attachments after losing his own family. They had shared one night of shelter from a storm, nothing more. But the memory of her face in the firelight, the vulnerability in her eyes, the strength beneath the exhaustion, all of it haunted him in ways he could not explain. 2 weeks after he had taken her to town, Ryder found himself making the trip back for supplies he did not really need. He told himself it was practical, that he might as well stock up before the weather turned. But when he walked into the general store and found himself asking Hank Cooper, the owner, how the new woman at the hotel was working out, he could no longer deny the truth. "Prudence." "She is a wonder," Hank said enthusiastically. "Martha says she is the best cook she has ever had. The hotel dining room has been packed every night since she started. She makes this apple pie that is just heavenly." Ryder felt an absurd surge of pleasure at this news, as if Prudence's success reflected well on him somehow. He bought the supplies he did not need and found his feet carrying him toward the hotel. The dining room was indeed busy, the tables full of men eating their midday meal. Ryder spotted Prudence immediately, moving between tables with plates balanced expertly on her arms. She wore a simple gray dress now, still respectable for a widow but more practical than the heavy black. Her hair was pinned up neatly, and there was color in her cheeks that had not been there 2 weeks ago. She saw him at the same moment, and her face lit up with such genuine pleasure that his heart did an odd little flip in his chest. She finished serving the table she was at and hurried over to him. "Ryder, I was hoping you would come by." She seemed to realize how that sounded and added quickly, "I wanted to thank you properly. I have been so busy settling in. Are you hungry? I can bring you lunch." "I would not say no to a hot meal," he admitted, and she showed him to a small table by the window. The food was as good as Hank had promised, maybe better. Roasted chicken with potatoes and carrots, fresh bread still warm from the oven, and yes, a slice of that famous apple pie. Prudence checked on him several times between serving other customers, and each time she seemed reluctant to leave, lingering for an extra moment of conversation. "You look well," he said during one of these visits. "The work agrees with you. It does. Martha is wonderful to work for, and I love cooking. It makes me feel useful, needed." She paused, twisting her hands in her apron. "I have been thinking about you, wondering if you were well out there all alone." "I am used to it," Ryder said, though he had found the solitude harder to bear since meeting her. "But it was kind of you to think of me." "It was more than kindness," Prudence said softly. Then Martha called her name and she hurried away, leaving Ryder to puzzle over her words. He finished his meal slowly, watching her work, noticing how the other diners responded to her warm smile and efficient service. She belonged here, he thought. She had found her place in Mineral Point. When he went to pay, Martha waved him off. "No charge for the man who brought Prudence to me." "She has been a blessing." Ryder thanked her and turned to leave, but Prudence caught him at the door. "Will you come back?" she asked. "For Sunday dinner, perhaps. I am off except for breakfast, but I could cook something special for you, for us, to repay your kindness." It was improper, he knew. A widow and a bachelor sharing a meal alone would set tongues wagging, but looking into her hopeful eyes, he could not bring himself to refuse. "Sunday, then. What time?" 1 o'clock. "I will make something you will not forget." He smiled despite himself. "I will be here." Sunday seemed to take forever to arrive. Ryder found himself bathing more carefully than usual, putting on his good shirt, the one he saved for rare trips to Cheyenne. He even trimmed his beard, which had gotten a bit wild over the summer. When he arrived at the hotel at precisely 1 o'clock, Prudence was waiting on the porch. She wore a dress of deep blue, the first color he had seen on her, and her hair was arranged in soft curls around her face. She was not wearing her bonnet, which seemed significant somehow, as if she were shedding the trappings of her widowhood. "I thought we could take a walk," she said. "I packed a picnic. Martha said there is a pretty spot by the creek just outside town." "I know the place," Ryder said, offering his arm. She took it, and they walked together through the quiet Sunday streets, past the church where services had just let out, drawing curious looks from the townspeople. The spot by the creek was indeed pretty, a grove of cottonwoods providing shade, the water running clear and cold over smooth stones. Prudence spread a blanket and unpacked her basket. Fried chicken, biscuits, fresh tomatoes, and slices of cake that made his mouth water just looking at them. "You have been busy," he said, settling onto the blanket beside her. "I like to cook for people I care about," she said, then blushed at her own words. "That is, I wanted to do something nice for you." They ate and talked, and the conversation flowed more easily than it had before. She told him about her childhood in Ohio, her marriage to William, the move west that had promised so much and delivered so little. He found himself sharing things he had not spoken of in years. His own wife Sarah, their baby daughter Emma, who had lived only 3 days, the grief that had driven him from Kansas to Wyoming, seeking solitude and forgetting. "You understand, then," Prudence said softly, "what it is to lose everything." "I do, and I know that time does not heal it, not really. You just learn to carry it differently." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm against his. "I feel like I can breathe around you, like I do not have to pretend to be all right when I am not." "Does that make sense?" "It does." He looked at their joined hands, marveling at how natural it felt. "I have been alone a long time, Prudence. I thought that was what I wanted, but since the night you knocked on my door, I have been feeling differently about things." "How do you feel?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Like maybe being alone is not the same as being at peace. Like maybe I have been hiding instead of healing." She moved closer, and he could smell the soap she had used, something floral and sweet. "I have been hiding too. In my grief, in my widow's clothes, in the idea that I am supposed to mourn forever. But William would not have wanted that. He would have wanted me to live." "Then live," Ryder said, reaching up to touch her face. "You deserve happiness, Prudence. You deserve a full life." "So do you," she replied. And then somehow the distance between them had closed and he was kissing her, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. When they finally pulled apart, Both breathing hard, Ryder felt like he had been struck by lightning. "I am sorry," he started to say, but she pressed her fingers against his lips. "Do not be sorry, I wanted that. I have wanted it since that first night, which probably makes me terrible." "It makes you human," he said, kissing her fingers. "But Prudence, people will talk. You are still wearing your widow's weeds, and I am a man with a reputation for being a hermit. If we do this, if we court properly, it will not be easy." "I do not care what people say," she said fiercely. "I have spent too much of my life caring what others think. I know my own heart, Ryder. I know it is too soon. I know I should wait longer, but I also know that life is short and uncertain, and I do not want to waste whatever time I have being alone when I could be with you." Her words struck something deep inside him, breaking through the walls he had so carefully constructed. "I am not an easy man to love," he warned. "I am set in my ways. I have been alone too long. And I am a widow with nothing to my name but a carpetbag and a job at a hotel. I have a past and grief and probably more problems than you know what to do with. But if you are willing to try, so am I." He kissed her again, longer this time, and when they finally settled back on the blanket, her head on his shoulder, Ryder felt something he had not felt in 4 long years. Hope. They courted through the rest of September and into October, and Ryder had been right about one thing. People did talk. Some said Prudence was being disrespectful to her late husband's memory. Others whispered that Ryder Malone was taking advantage of a vulnerable woman. But Martha Kincaid put a stop to the worst of the gossip with a few well-placed words about minding one's own business and letting people find happiness where they could. Ryder found himself coming into town more and more often, timing his visits to Prudence's free hours. They walked together, talked for hours, shared meals. He learned that she loved to read but had few books. He brought her novels from his own small collection, saved from his old life. She learned that he was trying to build his cattle operation into something substantial, but lacked the capital to expand. She helped him plan and budget, her head for figures surprisingly sharp. Slowly, carefully, they built something real between them. Not the passionate whirlwind of young love, but something deeper, forged from shared loss and hard-won understanding. They knew what it meant to lose everything. They understood the preciousness of second chances. It was late October when Ryder invited Prudence to visit his cabin again. She had not been back since that first stormy night, and he wanted her to see it as it really was in daylight, as a home rather than just a shelter. She came on a Sunday afternoon, riding beside him in the wagon, wrapped in a shawl against the autumn chill. The aspens had turned gold, carpeting the hills in brilliant color, and the air had that crystalline quality it got in the mountains before winter settled in for good. "It is beautiful out here," Prudence said as they approached the cabin. "Isolated but beautiful. Too isolated." Ryder asked, suddenly uncertain. What if she realized how remote his life was, how hard the winters could be? What if she decided she could not live this way? But Prudence just smiled. "I grew up on a farm in Ohio. I am not afraid of isolation or hard work. I am only afraid of being alone in it." He helped her down from the wagon and showed her around. The cabin looked better than it had that stormy night. He had cleaned thoroughly, even put wildflowers in a jar on the table. She walked through slowly, touching things, looking out the window at the view of the mountains, standing by the stove where she had dried herself that first night. "I can see us here," she said finally. "Is that wrong of me, to already be imagining a future?" "No," Ryder said, coming to stand behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders. "I have been imagining it too. You in the kitchen, in the garden I could plant, children perhaps if we are blessed, growing old together." She turned in his arms, looking up at him with those stormy gray eyes. "Are you asking me something, Ryder Malone?" I am asking if you would consider becoming my wife. I know it has only been a few months. I know people will say it is too fast. But I am 32 years old, Prudence, and I have learned that life does not wait. I love you. I want to build a life with you if you will have me." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes. Yes, I will marry you. I love you too. I have been trying not to say it, thinking it was too soon, but I do. I love your quiet strength and your kindness and the way you understand grief without trying to fix it. I love that you make me want to live again, fully and completely." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and she responded with an urgency that matched his own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "How long of an engagement?" he asked. "Because I find I am not a very patient man when it comes to you." She laughed, the sound bright and free. "Long enough to be proper, but not a day longer." "What do you say to December? A winter wedding?" "I say it sounds perfect." They told Martha first, and despite her usual gruff demeanor, the older woman got misty-eyed. "I am happy for you both," she said, pulling Prudence into a hug. "You deserve this. And Ryder, you take care of her, you hear?" "With my life," he promised. The news spread through Mineral Point like wildfire. Most people were happy for them, though there were still a few who thought Prudence was remarrying too quickly. But Prudence held her head high and ignored the whispers. She was done living her life according to other people's expectations. They set the date for December 10th, giving them just over a month to prepare. It would be a simple wedding in the small church, with a reception after at the hotel. Prudence continued working for Martha, saving every penny she could. Ryder threw himself into preparing the cabin, building furniture, stocking supplies for the winter, making everything ready for his bride. He also made a trip to Cheyenne, to a jeweler he had heard was honest. There he bought 2 gold wedding bands and, after much deliberation, a silver locket with a small diamond chip. It was not much, but it was all he could afford, and he wanted to give Prudence something beautiful, something that spoke of his love. The weeks flew by in a flurry of preparations. Prudence sewed herself a new dress, not white but a soft cream color that suited her complexion. She made a shirt for Ryder too, spending her evenings embroidering his initials on the pocket with careful stitches. Martha insisted on making the wedding cake herself, and the other women of Mineral Point, warming to the romance of it all, pitched in with food for the reception. On a cold Saturday morning in early December, 2 days before the wedding, Ryder woke to find 6 inches of snow blanketing the ground. He lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling, struck by the enormity of what he was about to do. In 2 days, he would be a married man again. He would have someone to share his life, his home, his future. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. He dressed and did his chores, his mind already in town with Prudence. He had promised to come by that evening to finalize the last details. As he worked, he found himself thinking about Sarah, his first wife. He had loved her deeply, and her loss had nearly destroyed him. But time had done its work, and he could think of her now with sadness, but not the crushing grief that had once defined his days. He thought Sarah would have approved of Prudence. They were different women, but both had possessed that same quiet strength, that ability to face hardship without breaking. And he thought Prudence would not mind the place Sarah and baby Emma held in his heart. She understood that love was not a finite resource, that honoring the past did not mean you could not embrace the future. That evening, as he drove the wagon into Mineral Point through the fresh snow, Ryder felt a peace settle over him that he had not known in years. The lights of the town glowed warm against the winter darkness, and when he walked into the hotel, Prudence was there waiting, her face lighting up at the sight of him. 2 more days, she said, coming into his arms without hesitation, propriety forgotten. 2 more days, he agreed, holding her close. Are you nervous? Terrified, she admitted, but in a good way, like standing at the edge of something wonderful and just needing to trust enough to jump. We will jump together, he promised. They spent the evening going over last-minute details, but mostly they just sat together in the hotel parlor, talking quietly, holding hands, savoring these last days of courtship before beginning their married life. I have something for you, Ryder said as the evening grew late. He pulled the small velvet box from his pocket and handed it to her. It is not much, but I wanted you to have it. Prudence opened the box and gasped. The locket gleamed in the lamplight, the tiny diamond catching the flame. Ryder, it is beautiful. You should not have spent so much. You are worth far more than a simple locket, he said. Open it. She did, revealing the tiny space inside meant for pictures or locks of hair. It is empty, she said, confused. For now, but I thought perhaps we could fill it together with memories of our life. Maybe a picture someday when we make it back to Cheyenne. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. You are making me cry again. I have cried more in the past few months than in the past year. Good tears, though. The best tears, she assured him, leaning in to kiss him softly. Thank you. I will treasure it always. The night before the wedding, Ryder stayed in town at Martha's insistence. Bad luck to see the bride before the ceremony, she declared, and though neither Ryder nor Prudence believed in such superstitions, they humored her. Ryder spent a restless night in one of the hotel rooms, listening to the wind howl outside, hoping the weather would hold for tomorrow. He must have finally slept because he woke to bright sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of excited voices in the hallway. It was his wedding day. He dressed carefully in his best clothes, the new shirt Prudence had made fitting perfectly. He ran a hand through his dark hair, tried to calm his nerves, and finally gave up and went downstairs to find half the town already gathered, ready to help celebrate. The church looked beautiful, decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons. Martha had outdone herself, and as Ryder stood at the altar waiting, he felt his throat tighten with emotion. Then the doors opened and Prudence appeared, and everything else faded away. She wore her cream-colored dress, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders in a cloud of curls, the silver locket gleaming at her throat. She carried a small bouquet of winter greenery and dried flowers, and she was the most beautiful thing Ryder had ever seen. She walked down the aisle alone, no father to give her away, but she held her head high and her eyes never left Ryder's face. When she reached him, he took her hand, and they turned together to face Reverend Michaels. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They spoke the traditional vows, promising to love and honor each other in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, until death parted them. When Ryder slid the gold band onto Prudence's finger, his hand was shaking. When she did the same for him, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I now pronounce you man and wife, Reverend Michaels said with a warm smile. You may kiss your bride. Ryder cupped Prudence's face in his hands and kissed her softly, reverently, sealing their promises with the sweetness of new beginnings. The small congregation erupted in applause and cheers, and when they turned to walk back down the aisle as husband and wife, Ryder felt like his heart might burst from happiness. The reception at the hotel was lively and warm. People ate and drank and danced. Martha's cake was a masterpiece, 3 layers with buttercream frosting, and Prudence laughed when Ryder carefully fed her the first bite instead of smashing it in her face, as some grooms did. They danced together, Ryder's arm around Prudence's waist, her hand in his, moving slowly to the fiddle music. Happy? He asked, looking down at her. Happier than I thought I could be, she replied. This morning I woke up as Prudence Palmer, alone in the world. Now I am Prudence Malone with a husband and a home and a future. It feels like a dream. If it is a dream, I never want to wake up." As the afternoon wore on and the celebration continued, Ryder found himself eager to leave to begin their new life together in private. Finally, as the sun began to set, painting the snow-covered town in shades of pink and gold, they said their goodbyes and climbed into the wagon for the ride home. The cabin was cold when they arrived, but Ryder had prepared everything before leaving. Within minutes, he had a fire roaring in the stove, filling the space with warmth and light. Prudence stood in the center of the room, looking around with possessive satisfaction. "Our home," she said softly. "Our home," Ryder agreed. He came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "Are you cold, tired, hungry?" She turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. "I am none of those things. I am exactly where I want to be." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and she responded with a passion that made his blood sing. They moved together toward the bed, shedding layers of clothing, discovering each other with gentle hands and whispered endearments. Their lovemaking was tender and urgent all at once, a celebration of survival and second chances, of two broken people finding wholeness in each other. Afterward, they lay tangled together beneath the quilts, the firelight casting dancing shadows on the walls. Prudence traced patterns on Ryder's chest, her head pillowed on his shoulder. "I love you," she said. "I know I have said it before, but I want to keep saying it. I never want you to doubt it." "I love you too," he replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "You have given me back my life, Prudence. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. Now I feel alive again." She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him seriously. "We should talk about the future, about what we want, all right. What do you want?" "A family," she said without hesitation. "I want children if we are blessed with them. I want to build something lasting here. And I want us to always talk to each other, to never let grief or hardship come between us." "I want all those things too," Ryder said. "Children especially. I know there is risk after what happened with Emma, but I want to try. I want to fill this house with life and laughter." "Then we will," Prudence said firmly. "And whatever happens, we will face it together." The winter passed in a blur of happiness. Prudence settled into the cabin as if she had always been there, making it truly a home with small touches. Curtains for the window, a rug by the door, jars of preserved vegetables lining the shelves. She cooked meals that made the small space smell like heaven, and she sang while she worked, her voice sweet and clear. Ryder found that he loved being married, loved having someone to share his days with. He taught Prudence to ride better, and she began helping him with the cattle, unafraid of the hard work. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, reading aloud to each other, playing cards or simply talking, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for their future. By February, Prudence suspected she was with child. By March, there was no doubt. Ryder was terrified and elated all at once, his joy tempered by memories of Sarah's difficult pregnancy and Emma's brief, tragic life. But Prudence was strong and healthy, and as her belly grew, so did his confidence. "I am not Sarah," Prudence said gently one evening when she caught him watching her with worried eyes. "And this baby is not Emma. I understand your fear, Ryder, but we cannot live in the shadow of what was. We have to trust in what is." "I know. I am trying." "Try harder," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her rounded stomach. "Feel that. That is our child, alive and strong. Have faith." He did feel it, the flutter of life beneath his palm, and something in his chest loosened. "I do have faith in you, in us, in this family we are building." Spring arrived late that year, but when it finally came, it transformed the landscape overnight. Green grass pushed through the last patches of snow, wildflowers bloomed in riots of color, and the cattle grew fat on the new growth. Prudence's garden flourished under her careful tending, and the cabin felt almost too small to contain their happiness. In early June, as the summer heat began to build, Prudence's labor began. Ryder had arranged for Martha to come stay with them as the time drew near, and the older woman arrived 2 days before the pains started, bringing with her the experience of having birthed 5 children of her own and helped deliver dozens more. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Ryder paced outside, useless and terrified, listening to Prudence's cries and remembering another night, another birth that had ended in heartbreak. But when Martha finally called him in, it was to present him with a squalling, red-faced, absolutely perfect baby boy. Prudence lay exhausted in the bed, her hair damp with sweat, but her smile was radiant. "Meet your son," she said as Ryder approached on shaking legs. He took the baby from Martha with infinite care, staring down at the tiny face in wonder. The boy had dark hair like his own and his mother's gray eyes. He was real and alive and healthy, and Ryder felt tears streaming down his face before he even realized he was crying. "He is perfect," he managed to say. "You are perfect, thank you for this gift." "What shall we name him?" Prudence asked. They had discussed names for months, going back and forth, but now, looking at his son, Ryder knew. "James, for my father, James Ryder Malone." "James," Prudence repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, James. Welcome to the world." The baby made a little snuffling sound, and they both laughed, giddy with exhaustion and joy. Martha bustled around, cleaning up, making Prudence comfortable, giving instructions about feeding and care. But Ryder barely heard her. He was lost in the miracle of his son, this tiny person who carried his blood and Prudence's, who represented everything they had survived to reach this moment. Martha stayed for a week, helping Prudence recover and teaching them both the intricacies of caring for a newborn. By the time she left, they had settled into a routine of sorts, though James seemed determined to keep them on their toes with his lusty cries and frequent feedings. Ryder had never been so tired or so happy. He would wake in the night to the sound of crying and find Prudence already up, nursing the baby by lamplight, and he would sit with them, his arm around his wife, marveling at the family they had become. As summer turned to fall and James grew from a newborn to a chubby, smiling infant, Ryder felt the last of his grief over Sarah and Emma finally release its grip on his heart. He would always love them, always carry them with him, but the weight of that loss no longer defined him. He had been given a second chance at happiness, and he was determined not to waste a single moment of it. One evening in late September, almost a year exactly from the night Prudence had knocked on his door, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. James slept in Prudence's arms, his tiny fist curled against her chest. "You remember this night last year?" Prudence asked. "The storm, how frightened I was." "I remember. I also remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met, to be out there alone, to keep going when most people would have given up." "I did not feel brave. I felt desperate, but that desperation led me here to you, to this life. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if your cabin had been a mile further if I had not found it. Where would I be now?" "You would have survived," Ryder said. "You are a survivor, Prudence. But I am grateful every day that you found my door, that you knocked, that you gave us both a chance. I am grateful too, grateful for you, for James, for this home we have built." She looked up at him, her gray eyes soft in the fading light. "I never thought I could be this happy. After William died, after all I lost, I thought happiness was something other people had, but you have given it back to me." "You gave it to me first," Ryder said, leaning in to kiss her gently. "You knocked on my door and you changed everything." "I opened it for you, Prudence, and I will never let you leave. Not because I am holding you captive, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "Good," she said, smiling. "Because I am not going anywhere. This is my home. You are my home. You and James, and whatever other children we might be blessed with. This is where I belong." The years unfolded with the gentle rhythm of a life well lived. In 1880, Prudence gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Clara, whose auburn hair and fierce disposition marked her as her mother's child from the start. Ryder's cattle operation grew steadily, and he hired 2 men to help with the work, allowing him more time with his growing family. In 1882, another son arrived, Robert, quieter than his older brother but with the same steady determination. The cabin became too small, and Ryder spent that winter building an addition, 2 bedrooms and a larger kitchen, transforming their small shelter into a proper house. Mineral Point grew too, the arrival of more settlers bringing new businesses and opportunities. Prudence became known throughout the area for her cooking, and she began taking special orders for wedding cakes and holiday meals, earning money that she saved carefully for the children's future. Martha Kincaid remained a close friend, visiting often and spoiling the children shamelessly. She eventually sold the hotel and built a small house near the Malone Ranch, declaring that she was too old to deal with the demands of running a business, and that she wanted to spend her remaining years near the people she loved. The children grew healthy and strong, running wild across the Wyoming hills, learning to ride and work cattle almost as soon as they could walk. James developed his father's quiet strength and his mother's fierce loyalty. Clara was fearless, always climbing too high and running too fast, keeping her parents in a constant state of heart-stopping concern and pride. Robert, the youngest, had a gentle soul and a way with animals that amazed everyone. In 1886, when Ryder was 40 and Prudence 33, they made the journey to Cheyenne to have a family photograph taken. It was an event they had talked about for years, and they all dressed in their finest for the occasion. The photographer positioned them carefully, Ryder and Prudence seated, with James standing tall behind his mother, already approaching his father's height at 7 years old. Clara perched on Prudence's lap, grinning despite instructions to stay still. Robert leaned against Ryder's knee, his small hand resting trustingly on his father's arm. When the photograph was developed and they saw it for the first time, Prudence cried. "Look at us," she whispered. "Look at this family we have made." Ryder looked at the image captured in sepia tones. His wife, still beautiful after years of hard work and motherhood, his 3 children healthy and happy, and himself, no longer the haunted man who had opened his door to a desperate widow 8 years ago. They looked like what they were, a family bound by love and forged through trials. That night in their Cheyenne hotel room, after the children were asleep, Ryder gave Prudence a gift. It was a small photograph, perfectly sized to fit in the locket he had given her on their wedding day. The family portrait, reduced to miniature, ready to be carried close to her heart. "Now it is filled with memories," he said as he helped her place it in the locket. "Just as I promised." She touched the locket, tears streaming down her face. "It is perfect. We are perfect. Not without flaws or struggles, but perfect for each other." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion that had never dimmed. Afterward, Prudence lay in Ryder's arms and talked about the future. "James will need to start thinking about his education soon," she said. "He is smart, Ryder. He could go to university if he wanted." "We will make sure he has that choice," Ryder agreed. "All of them will. We will give them opportunities we never had." And what about us? What do we want for ourselves? Ryder thought about this. I want to grow old with you. I want to see our children grown and married. I want to meet our grandchildren. And I want to still be holding your hand when we take our last breaths 50 years from now. Only 50, Prudence teased. I was hoping for at least 60. He laughed and pulled her closer. 60 then, or 70, or however long we are given. As long as I have you, I have everything I need. The years continued their steady march. James did indeed go to university, studying agriculture and returning to help expand the ranch into one of the most successful operations in the territory. Clara, to no one's surprise, married a rancher as tough and fearless as herself, and they built a spread of their own 20 miles north of Mineral Point. Robert became a veterinarian, studying in Denver and returning to serve the ranching community that had raised him. Ryder and Prudence grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies marked by the years of hard work. But the love between them never wavered. They still held hands when they walked, still kissed good morning and good night, still looked at each other as if seeing something precious and irreplaceable. In 1895, when they had been married 17 years and Ryder was 49 and Prudence 42, they made another journey to Cheyenne, this time for James's wedding. Their eldest son, now a confident young man of 16, was marrying a schoolteacher from Laramie, a smart, kind woman named Elizabeth who reminded them both of Prudence in her younger days. At the wedding reception, as they watched their son dance with his new bride, Prudence leaned against Ryder's shoulder. "Do you remember our wedding day? How simple it was. Just us and Martha's cake and the people of Mineral Point. I remember thinking I was the luckiest man alive." I still think that. We have built a good life, have we not? A family, a home, a legacy. We have built everything I ever dreamed of and more, and it all started the night you knocked on my door. She smiled, that same smile that had captured his heart so many years ago. Best decision I ever made. I was terrified that night, Ryder, wet and cold and so alone. But when you opened that door, when I saw your face, something in me knew, this is home. This is safety. This is where my new life begins. I felt it too. I tried to tell myself I was just helping someone in need, but the truth is, you helped me just as much. Maybe more. You brought me back to life. They watched their son and his new wife for a while longer, then danced themselves, moving slowly to the music, perfectly in step after so many years together. As the 20th century approached, Ryder and Prudence began to slow down, leaving more of the ranch work to James and his growing family. They had 5 grandchildren now, with more surely on the way, and they spent their days watching the next generation grow, passing on stories and wisdom, marveling at the continuation of the family line. On December 10th, 1903, their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house was full to bursting with children and grandchildren, the noise level somewhere between joyful and chaotic. Martha, now in her 80s but still sharp as ever, sat in the place of honor, regaling the grandchildren with tales of when their grandparents first met. "Your grandmother showed up on a stormy night, wet as a drowned cat," she told them. "And your grandfather brought her to me, looking all gruff and uncomfortable. But even then, I could see it in their eyes. They had found each other, even if they did not know it yet." After dinner, when the children were playing and the adults were talking, Ryder pulled Prudence outside onto the porch. The December night was cold but clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. 25 years, he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "A quarter of a century with you. The best 25 years of my life," Prudence replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. Do you have any regrets? Not a single one. Do you? Only that I did not knock on your door sooner, she said, turning to face him. But I suppose we found each other at exactly the right time, when we were both ready, both strong enough to build something lasting. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 25 years of love and partnership, of struggles overcome and joys shared. When they pulled apart, she was wearing the silver locket he had given her on their wedding day, now a quarter-century old, still holding the family photograph from 1886. I should get a new picture made, she said, touching the locket. One with all the grandchildren. We will do it in the spring, Ryder promised, when everyone can make it to Cheyenne again. They stood together on the porch, listening to the laughter from inside, feeling the cold air on their faces and the warmth of their love surrounding them. They had started with nothing but grief and a storm, and they had built an empire of love, a family that would continue long after they were gone. As they grew older still, Ryder and Prudence became fixtures in Mineral Point, the old couple who still held hands when they walked down the street, who still looked at each other with love after decades of marriage. They were proof that second chances existed, that loss did not have to be permanent, that opening your door to a stranger might be the best decision you ever made. They lived to see James have 4 children, Clara 3, and Robert 2. They lived to see the new century arrive, bringing automobiles and telephones and changes they could never have imagined in their youth. But through it all, they remained constant, anchored by their love for each other and the family they had created. In the spring of 1910, when Ryder was 64 and Prudence 57, they made one final trip to Cheyenne. This time it was not for a photograph or a wedding, but simply to see the city one more time, to remember their journey together. They visited the jeweler where Ryder had bought Prudence's locket all those years ago. The original owner was long gone, but his son remembered the story, had heard it from his father. "The cowboy who bought a locket for his widow bride," he said with a smile. "My father always said it was one of his favorite sales because he knew it was going to a love that would last." "It did last," Prudence said, touching the locket at her throat. "It is still lasting." They walked the streets of Cheyenne, remembering their first visit with the children, remembering all the times they had come here over the years. The city had grown enormously, almost unrecognizable from the frontier town. It had been when Prudence first arrived as a desperate widow in 1878. 32 years ago, Prudence said, doing the math. 32 years since I was here last, alone and frightened. So much has changed. "You have changed," Ryder said. "From a grieving widow to the matriarch of a family, from someone with nothing to someone who has everything that matters." "We both changed. We changed each other." That night in their hotel room they lay together as they had so many nights before, comfortable in each other's presence, needing no words to communicate their love. But Prudence spoke anyway, her voice soft in the darkness. "I want you to know something, Ryder. If I had my life to live over, if I could go back to that night in 1878, I would not change a single thing. Not the storm, not the fear, not the desperation. Because all of it led me to your door. And knocking on that door, having you open it, building this life with you, it has been the greatest gift I could ever have received." "You gave me back my life," Ryder replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I was dead inside when you came to me, just going through the motions. You made me want to live again. You made me want to love again. Everything good in my life for the past 3 decades has been because of you." They fell asleep holding each other, and in the morning they began the journey home to Mineral Point, to the ranch that had grown from a simple cabin, to the family that had grown from 2 broken people finding wholeness together. Years continued to pass, marked by birthdays and anniversaries, by grandchildren growing up and having children of their own. Ryder and Prudence grew frailer but no less devoted to each other. They spent their days sitting on the porch of the house Ryder had built, watching the mountains change color with the seasons, holding hands and remembering. In the autumn of 1918, as the world reeled from the Great War and the deadly influenza that followed, Ryder fell ill. He was 72, had lived a full and rich life, but Prudence could not bear the thought of losing him. She nursed him herself, refusing to leave his side, reading to him, talking to him, reminiscing about their decades together. "You remember the night we met?" she asked him one evening as the sun set outside their window. "The storm and how you opened the door and looked so fierce. I was trying to figure out if you were real or a dream," Ryder said, his voice weak but still warm. "You were so beautiful, even soaked and exhausted. I knew my life was about to change. Mine already had. From the moment you let me in." He squeezed her hand, the grip not as strong as it once was, but no less meaningful. "Prudence, if I do not make it through this, I want you to know that you have made my life complete. I have no regrets, no wishes unfulfilled. You gave me everything." "Stop talking like that," she said fiercely, tears streaming down her face. "You are not leaving me. We still have years left. We agreed, remember, at least 60 years together. We are only at 40. He smiled, that gentle smile she had loved for 4 decades. "Then I will fight for you, for more time." And he did fight. With Prudence by his side, with the prayers of their family and friends, with sheer stubborn will, Ryder recovered slowly. By Christmas, he was back on his feet, thinner and weaker than before, but alive and determined to keep his promise to his wife. They celebrated that Christmas surrounded by 3 generations of family. Their 3 children, now grown with gray in their own hair. Their 9 grandchildren, ranging from infancy to adulthood. And their first great-grandchild, James's eldest daughter's son, a chubby baby named Ryder after his great-grandfather. As Prudence held the baby, looking down at his peaceful sleeping face, she felt the weight of time and legacy. This child carried her blood and Ryder's, carried the love story that had begun on a stormy night 40 years ago. Their story would continue through him and all the children yet to come, a ripple effect of love spreading outward into the future. "We did good," Ryder said, watching her with the baby. "We built something that will last." "We did," she agreed. "We took our grief and our loss and our second chances, and we built a family, a legacy, a love that will echo through generations." The 1920s arrived, bringing more changes to the world, but in their corner of Wyoming, time seemed to move at its own pace. Ryder and Prudence, now in their 70s, spent their days quietly, content in each other's company. They took walks when the weather permitted, Ryder's pace slower but his hand still firmly holding Prudence's. They sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains they had called home for so many decades. On a warm summer evening in 1923, 45 years after that stormy night that brought them together, they sat on their porch as usual. The mountains glowed pink and gold in the setting sun, and the sound of children's laughter drifted from the nearby barn where some of the grandchildren were playing. 45 years, Prudence said, echoing Ryder's thoughts. She was 70 now, her auburn hair completely white, her face lined with the marks of a life well lived. But her eyes were still that stormy gray, and when she looked at Ryder, they still held the same love they had that first night. 45 years since you knocked on my door, Ryder agreed. He was 77 now, his body bearing the marks of decades of ranch work, but his mind remained sharp, and his love for Prudence burned as bright as ever. "Best night of my life. Mine too. even though I was terrified and exhausted and thought I might die in that storm. But you did not die. You lived. We lived. And we built all this together." He gestured at the sprawling ranch, at the house they had expanded over the years, at the family that even now was gathering for Sunday dinner. "You ever wonder how different things would have been if I had not found your cabin that night?" Prudence asked. "If I had gone a different direction, or if you had not been home?" "I try not to think about it," Ryder admitted, "because the alternative is too horrible to contemplate. A life without you in it. That is not a life I want to imagine." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun completed its descent and the first stars appeared. Inside the house, they could hear Martha directing the grandchildren to set the table, her voice still strong despite her advanced age of 93. "I love you, Ryder Malone," Prudence said softly. "I have loved you since that first night, even though I did not know it yet. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Prudence Malone. You knocked on my door begging for shelter, and I opened it and found my whole world. I never let you leave because I never wanted to live without you again." They kissed, gentle and sweet, a kiss that held 45 years of love, partnership, joy, and sorrow shared equally. When they pulled apart, both had tears in their eyes, but they were happy tears, grateful tears. The years that followed were peaceful. Ryder and Prudence continued their quiet life, surrounded by family, rooted in the land they had made their own. They saw great-grandchildren grow and marry, saw the beginning of yet another generation. They remained devoted to each other until the very end, never spending a night apart, never taking their love for granted. In the spring of 1928, exactly 50 years after that fateful stormy night, they planned a celebration. It would be a gathering of the entire family, a recognition of the golden anniversary of the day they met. But Ryder's health had been declining, and Prudence worried that he might not make it to the event. "I will be there," he assured her. "I promised you 60 years, remember? I am not done yet." And he was there, sitting in a place of honor with Prudence by his side, as over 50 members of their extended family gathered to celebrate. James gave a speech about his parents, about the love story that had created this family. Clara shared memories of growing up with parents who clearly adored each other. Robert talked about the lessons they had taught him about commitment and devotion. When it was Prudence's turn to speak, she stood with Ryder's hand in hers and looked out at the assembled family. Her children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and even one great-great-grandchild on the way. "50 years ago tonight," she began, "I knocked on a stranger's door in the middle of a terrible storm. I was a widow with nothing but a carpetbag and grief. I was lost and alone and certain that my life was over. But the man who opened that door saw past my circumstances to the person I could become. He gave me shelter that night, and he never let me leave. Not because he kept me prisoner, but because he loved me so completely that I never wanted to go. Together, we built this." She gestured at the family surrounding them. "We built love and legacy and a story that I hope will be told for generations to come. Ryder Malone, you are my heart, my home, my everything. Thank you for opening that door. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for this beautiful life." There was not a dry eye in the room when she finished. Ryder stood slowly, using his cane for support, and pulled Prudence into his arms. They danced, slowly and carefully, to music only they could hear, moving to the rhythm of 50 years of love. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Ryder and Prudence lay together in the bedroom they had shared for 5 decades. The silver locket lay on the nightstand, its photograph updated multiple times over the years, but still carried close to Prudence's heart every day. "Thank you for giving me those 60 years, Prudence whispered in the darkness. "We are not done yet," Ryder replied, but his voice was weak. "We still have time." But time, it turned out, had its own plans. Ryder passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 nights later, with Prudence holding his hand, as he had always wanted. He was 77 years old and had lived a life filled with love, family, and purpose. The grief was tremendous, a weight that threatened to crush Prudence even as her children and grandchildren rallied around her. She had lost William at 25 and had survived, but losing Ryder after 50 years together was different. He had not been just her husband but her partner, her best friend, her reason for living. For weeks after his death, she moved through the days in a haze, going through the motions of living without truly being present. But slowly, with the support of her family and the memories of Ryder's love, she began to heal. Not to forget, never to forget, but to honor his memory by continuing to live fully, as he would have wanted. She lived for 8 more years, spending them surrounded by her ever-growing family, telling stories about Ryder, about their love, about that stormy night that changed everything. She made sure every child and grandchild knew the story by heart. How their grandmother had knocked on their grandfather's door begging for shelter, how he had opened it and never let her leave, how they had built an empire of love from nothing but grief and second chances. Prudence Malone passed away peacefully in her sleep on a warm summer night in 1936. She was 83 years old. Her children found her in the morning, still wearing the silver locket Ryder had given her on their wedding day 58 years earlier. Inside the locket was a photograph of their whole family, taken at their 50th anniversary celebration, Ryder's hand holding hers, both of them smiling with the contentment of a life well lived together. They buried her next to Ryder in the small cemetery on the ranch, under a tree they had planted together on their 10th anniversary. The gravestone was simple. Ryder Malone, 1851–1928, beloved husband, father. Grandfather Prudence Palmer Malone, 1853–1936, beloved wife, mother. Grandmother, together in life, together in eternity. The story of Ryder and Prudence became legend in Mineral Point and the surrounding area. Their descendants grew to number in the hundreds, spread across the country, but they all knew the story of how it began. A widow knocking on a cowboy's door in a storm, a man brave enough to open it, and a love that lasted not just a lifetime but generations. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through the years, a living testament to what 2 broken people could build when they found each other. The cabin where they first met still stood, preserved and maintained, where children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would come to hear the story and understand where their family began. And on stormy nights, when the wind howled across the Wyoming plains and the rain beat against the windows, the descendants of Ryder and Prudence Malone would gather inside, warm and safe, and remember the night a desperate widow knocked on a lonely cowboy's door, and both their lives changed forever. They would remember that sometimes the greatest love stories begin in the darkest moments, that second chances are real, and that opening your door to a stranger might just be the beginning of everything beautiful in your life. The legacy of their love lived on, not just in the family they created, but in the lesson they taught. That grief does not have to be permanent, that hope can survive even the darkest storms, and that love, when it is real and true, never really ends. It continues, generation after generation, a light passed from hand to hand, illuminating the darkness and showing others the way home.